Karen was loud, entitled, and absolutely sure she was winning. My mom and I were already seated in first class when she marched down the aisle with two friends behind her, pointing straight at my mom and saying, "Those seats belong to us. Move. Now." Flight attendants froze. Passengers stared. My mom calmly held up her boarding pass. That's when Karen made the worst mistake of her life. Because 5 minutes later, she wasn't in first class anymore. She was being escorted to the very last row of the plane. And the reason why? It destroyed her in front of everyone. The boarding gate at Terminal C looked like every other Friday afternoon circus. People lined up 3 deep, roller bags clacking over tile, toddlers crying, and business travelers staring at their phones like the world might end if their email didn't refresh. My mom and I stood off to the side, quietly waiting for our boarding group to be called. She held her first-class boarding pass in one hand and her coffee in the other, relaxed in a way I'd rarely seen her. This trip meant a lot to her. It was the first time in years she'd let herself splurge on something nice. She'd worked double shifts for months to afford the upgrade, and she deserved every inch of that wide leather seat. Group 1 now boarding, the agent announced. We joined the line, handed over our passes, and walked down the jet bridge into the plane. First class felt like another world. Soft lighting, polished wood trim, spacious seats with real legroom. My mom smiled as she slid into 2A, setting her purse beside her. "I could get used to this," she whispered, laughing. I sat next to her, 2B, already settling in when the tension started. It began with the sound of heels clicking sharply against the aisle floor. Fast. Aggressive. The kind of walk that didn't ask for space. It demanded it. I looked up to see a woman in her late 40s, perfectly styled hair, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a scowl that looked permanently etched into her face. 2 women followed behind her, whispering and glancing around nervously. She stopped right beside my mom's seat. "That's ours," she said flatly, pointing at 2A and 2B like she was claiming property. My mom blinked. "Excuse me. Our seats. First class. You're in them." My mom calmly lifted her boarding pass. "No, I'm not. These are our seats." The woman scoffed loudly. "Oh, please. Do you know how much these cost? My friends and I are supposed to be sitting here." One of the women behind her leaned in and whispered, "Karen, I think we're in row." "Not now," she snapped, without even turning around. Passengers nearby had started watching. A man across the aisle paused mid-sip of orange juice. A flight attendant down the cabin glanced over, sensing trouble. My mom stayed composed. "If there's been a mistake, the crew can fix it. But these seats are on our tickets." Karen leaned closer, invading my mom's space. "I don't care what that says. We booked these seats. Move. Now." There it was, that tone. The one that assumed obedience. I felt my jaw tighten. "Maybe you should check your boarding pass," I said. Karen turned her glare on me. "This doesn't concern you." "She's my mom." "It does." Karen let out a sharp laugh. "Figures. You two don't even look like first-class people." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mom's smile faded, but she didn't raise her voice. "I'm not moving." Karen's face flushed red. "Unbelievable. You're really going to cause a scene over seats that don't belong to you." "Ma'am," a flight attendant finally stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "What seems to be the problem?" "These people stole our seats," Karen said instantly. "We paid for first class, and they're refusing to move." The attendant turned to my mom. "May I see your boarding passes?" My mom handed them over without hesitation. The attendant studied them, then nodded. "These seats are correct." Karen's mouth fell open. "That's impossible." "Let me see your boarding passes," the attendant said. Karen fumbled in her designer bag, pulling out 3 tickets and thrusting them forward. The attendant glanced at them, then frowned slightly. "Ma'am, you're in row 34. All 3 of you." The air shifted. "That can't be right," Karen said sharply. "We paid extra." "These are basic economy tickets," the attendant replied. Row 34 is at the back of the plane. Her friends stared at the tickets in horror. Karen's face twisted. This is ridiculous. Fix it. Put us here. I'm sorry, the attendant said. These seats are already occupied by their rightful passengers. Karen's voice rose. So you're just going to let them take what's ours? The entire first-class cabin was watching now. The attendant's tone hardened. Ma'am, you need to return to your assigned seats. Karen crossed her arms. I'm not moving. And that was the moment she sealed her own fate. Karen didn't realize what she'd done yet. Not really. She was still standing in the aisle, arms crossed, chin lifted, radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of never being told no. The flight attendant waited patiently, hands folded in front of her, while every passenger in first class pretended not to stare. Ma'am, the attendant said again, a little firmer, please return to your assigned seats. Karen scoffed. So you're just going to let them keep our first-class seats? This is discrimination. The word hit the cabin like a slap. A few people gasped. Someone behind us muttered, "Oh no." The attendant didn't flinch. There is no discrimination here. The tickets you presented are for row 34. You need to move so we can complete boarding. Karen's friends were now whispering urgently. Karen, maybe we should just... Quiet, she snapped. I'm handling this. She turned back to the attendant. Get your supervisor. Now. The attendant nodded once and stepped away. The silence that followed was thick and electric. My mom sat calmly beside me, hands folded in her lap, eyes straight ahead. I could feel her pulse through the armrest, but her face was unreadable. 2 minutes later, a man in a dark blue suit and captain's stripes appeared. What seems to be the issue? He asked. Karen launched into her story instantly. These people stole our seats, and your staff is refusing to fix it. We paid for first class, and they're trying to shove us into the back like criminals. The captain turned to the attendant. Tickets? She handed them over. He studied them quietly, his expression not changing. Then he looked up at Karen. Ma'am, these tickets are basic economy. Row 34. That's wrong, Karen snapped. My travel agent said first class. The boarding passes do not say first class, he replied calmly. They say 34E, 34F, and 34G. Karen opened her mouth to argue. He cut her off. These passengers, he said, nodding toward my mom and me, are properly seated. You are not. The entire first-class cabin was watching now. Even people 2 rows back were leaning into the aisle. Karen's cheeks burned red. So what, you're just going to embarrass us? You've already done that yourself, someone muttered softly behind us. A few snickers escaped. Karen whipped around. Who said that? The captain cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you do not take your assigned seats, I will have to involve airport security. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't dare. Try me, he said, still calm. For a moment it looked like she might explode. Then, with a dramatic huff, she snatched her purse from her shoulder. Fine, she said loudly. But I will be filing a complaint. This is unacceptable. She turned and started marching down the aisle toward the back of the plane. Her friends scrambled after her, mortified. The walk was long. First class, business class, premium economy. Then finally, the cramped, fluorescent-lit stretch of basic economy. Every head turned as she passed. By the time she reached row 34, the humiliation had fully set in. People in the cheap seats stared, confused by the drama trailing behind her. Karen shoved her bag into the overhead bin and dropped into the middle seat with a sharp, angry thud. One of her friends whispered, Karen, maybe you should apologize. Karen didn't respond. Up front, the captain handed my mom her boarding pass back with a polite smile. Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. It's okay, my mom said quietly. The plane finished boarding. The doors closed. Engines began to hum. And just when it seemed like the drama was over, a flight attendant approached our row again. Ma'am, she said to my mom, Could you please come with me for a moment? My stomach dropped. My mom looked at me, confused. Why? Just a quick question, the attendant said gently. Karen must have been watching from the back, because I could almost feel her satisfaction radiating down the aisle. My mom stood up, and that was when everything changed. The flight attendant led my mom down the narrow aisle toward the galley at the front of the plane. I stayed in my seat, heart pounding, watching her disappear behind the curtain. Every worst-case scenario ran through my head at once. Had Karen lied to the crew? Were they about to move my mom after all? Around me, first-class passengers whispered quietly. Did you see that woman? I've never seen someone act like that on a plane. I hope they don't reward her behavior. 5 long minutes passed. Then 10. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, and the faint ding of overhead bins echoed like a countdown. Finally, the curtain slid open. My mom walked back in, and she was smiling. Not relieved. Not polite. Smiling like someone who knew she'd just won. The flight attendant followed her, carrying a small handheld device. "Ma'am," she said loudly enough for several rows to hear, "thank you for your patience." Passengers leaned in. "We just needed to verify something regarding your ticket." Karen's head popped up from the back of the plane like a meerkat. The attendant turned slightly so the aisle cameras could see her screen. "It turns out you didn't just purchase first-class seats today. You've held elite status with this airline for over 15 years. My mom nodded. "And according to our system," the attendant continued, "your account includes priority protection. That means if there's ever a seating dispute, your assignment cannot be changed or overridden, even by a supervisor." A ripple went through the cabin. Karen, still 30 rows away, shouted, "That's not fair." The attendant ignored her. "However," she added, turning to my mom, "we also noticed something else." She tapped her screen again. "The passenger who claimed your seat attempted to have you removed under false pretenses. That violates our conduct policy." Karen froze. The captain appeared from the cockpit. "Ma'am," he called down the aisle toward Karen, "we need to speak with you again." Karen stood up slowly, dread now replacing her arrogance. She marched forward, but this time the energy was different. No swagger. No confidence. When she reached the front, the captain spoke quietly, but the tension was thick. "You told my crew you paid for first class. That was untrue." "I was confused," Karen said quickly. "You accused other passengers of stealing seat. That was untrue." "I thought." "And you refused multiple crew instructions." Karen opened her mouth again. The captain raised his hand. "Enough." He turned to the lead flight attendant. "What's her ticket class?" "Basic economy." "Seat?" "34F middle." A few people in first class snickered. The captain faced Karen again. "We're downgrading your boarding priority for this flight. You will not be permitted to move seats, request upgrades, or interact with other passengers for the remainder of the flight. If you do, we will divert." Karen's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "Yes, we can." Her friends stood frozen behind her, mortified. "But they," Karen pointed weakly toward my mom. "They did nothing wrong," the captain said. "You did." Silence. Then, with a voice that cut like ice, "Return to your seat." Karen turned around slowly, cheeks burning, and walked back down the aisle. Again. This time, no one looked away. Every pair of eyes followed her. Every whisper was about her. By the time she reached row 34, she was shaking. And then something else happened. A different flight attendant approached my mom. "Ma'am," she said kindly, "as an apology for the disturbance, we'd like to offer you complimentary lounge access on arrival and a travel credit." My mom blinked. "That's not necessary." "It is," the attendant smiled. "You handled this with incredible grace." I couldn't help but grin. Karen heard. You could practically feel the jealousy radiating off her from the back of the plane. The captain returned to the cockpit. The cabin crew secured the doors. And just before takeoff, something unexpected happened. Karen pressed the call button. A flight attendant approached her. "I want to speak to a manager," Karen whispered loudly. The attendant leaned in. "You already did." Karen snapped, "This is discrimination." The attendant straightened. "No, ma'am. This is consequence." Karen fell silent. The engines roared. We lifted off. And as the plane climbed into the clouds, I looked over at my mom, sitting comfortably in her wide first-class seat, sipping champagne with a calm smile. Karen, meanwhile, was crammed into a middle seat between two strangers, banned from moving, banned from complaining, banned from pretending she'd won. And the best part? She still had 4 hours left to sit there and think about it. The cabin had finally settled into that strange, quiet rhythm of flight. Engines hummed. Seatbelt lights dimmed. First-class passengers reclined into their wide leather seats, sipping drinks and pretending nothing dramatic had just happened. But nothing about this flight felt normal anymore. I glanced down the aisle toward the back. Karen sat stiffly in her middle seat, jaw clenched, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was hugging her own anger. One friend stared out the window. The other kept checking her phone like she was counting down the minutes until freedom. My mom leaned back, exhaling for the first time since we boarded. "Can you believe that?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I think she's still in shock." The flight attendant passed by and offered us warm towels. My mom thanked her politely. From behind us, a businessman leaned over. "You handled that incredibly well," he said. "Most people would have lost their temper." My mom smiled. "Some people dig their own holes. You just have to step back and let them." We hadn't even reached cruising altitude when Karen made her next mistake. She stood up. "Excuse me," she snapped at a passing flight attendant. "I need to use the restroom up front." The attendant checked her tablet. "There's a restroom in your cabin, ma'am." "That one is occupied," Karen said sharply. "I'm not waiting back there." "I'm sorry," the attendant replied. "You're restricted to your cabin for the remainder of the flight." Karen's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. Please return to your seat." People were watching again. Phones were out. A few passengers were clearly filming. Karen lowered her voice. "This is harassment." The attendant didn't move. "Seat. Now." Karen looked around, searching for sympathy. There was none. She slumped back into her seat, cheeks burning. 5 minutes later, turbulence hit. The plane jolted slightly, then again harder. The seatbelt sign lit up. Drinks rattled. A baby somewhere in the back began to cry. Karen, already on edge, slammed the call button repeatedly. "I need help," she shouted. "This is unsafe." A flight attendant approached. "Please remain seated, ma'am." Karen gestured wildly. "I paid for better service than this." "You paid for basic economy," the attendant said calmly. "And turbulence is not optional." A few people laughed. Karen's face twisted. "You're all enjoying this, aren't you?" No one answered. A loud bump shook the plane. My mom gripped the armrest for a moment, then relaxed as the aircraft stabilized. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and professional, explaining a short patch of rough air. Karen wasn't listening. "I want to be moved," she yelled. "I don't feel safe back here." The attendant sighed. "Ma'am, sit down." Karen refused. That was when the second attendant arrived. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you are interfering with cabin safety. Sit down now." Karen hesitated. People were staring again. Even passengers who had no idea what happened earlier could sense something was wrong. Slowly, Karen sank back into her seat. The turbulence passed. The seatbelt sign turned off. And just like that, the tension eased, except for Karen, who now looked like she was on the verge of tears. Minutes later, a flight attendant brought my mom a small plate of chocolate and a handwritten note. "Compliments of the crew," she said. Karen saw it. The jealousy was instant. Her friend leaned in and whispered something to her. Karen shook her head violently. "No. They don't deserve that." I couldn't help but smile. The rest of the flight passed quietly, but Karen never stopped glaring toward the front. Every time we laughed softly, Every time my mom reclined her seat or accepted another drink, Karen looked more and more miserable. When the captain announced our descent, Karen finally looked defeated. As the wheels touched down, a round of light applause filled the cabin. Karen didn't clap. She just sat there, trapped in her middle seat, surrounded by strangers who had watched her lose. And the doors hadn't even opened yet. By the time the seatbelt sign chimed off for the last time, the energy on the plane had completely shifted. First class felt calm again, quiet, almost victorious. People stretched, gathered their things, and shared knowing glances. Everyone had witnessed what happened, and no one was pretending otherwise. Except Karen. She was still back there in row 34, rigid in her middle seat, staring straight ahead as if she could will herself out of existence. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Welcome to Denver. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." A few seconds later, the aircraft rolled to a stop. The moment the ding sounded, first class began to rise. I stood and grabbed my bag. My mom slipped on her coat, calm and unbothered. We walked slowly down the aisle toward the exit. And then we passed Karen. Her eyes followed us as we moved forward. Her friends wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. People around her whispered, some not even trying to hide it. "That's the woman." "Yeah, her." She really thought. Karen's face burned crimson. As my mom and I reached her row, Karen suddenly stood up. "Wait," she snapped. The entire aisle froze. My mom turned. Karen looked different now. Smaller. Tired. The entitlement that once filled her face had cracked under the weight of public humiliation. "This isn't over," Karen muttered. "You don't get to just walk away like you won." My mom studied her for a long moment. "I didn't win," she said softly. "You lost." Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The flight attendant gently stepped between them. "Ma'am, please remain seated until your row is called." Karen sank back down. We continued forward. As we stepped into the jet bridge, the cold Denver air rushed in. My mom exhaled deeply, like she'd been holding her breath for 4 hours straight. "Well," she said, smiling. "That was something." I laughed. "You were a legend back there." She shook her head. "No. I just didn't let someone bully me." Behind us, Karen and her friends finally emerged from the plane. They walked quickly, heads down, avoiding every stare. At baggage claim, it happened again. Karen spotted us by the carousel. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Of course you're here too." My mom ignored her. Karen's friends whispered something, probably begging her to stop, but Karen couldn't help herself. "You think you're special?" she said loudly. "Just because you sat in first class?" A few people turned to look. My mom turned slowly. "I think I'm someone who bought what I paid for. And I think you're someone who tried to take it." Karen scoffed. "You should have just moved. And you should have read your ticket." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Karen's bag came down the chute. She yanked it off angrily, almost hitting someone. "Unbelievable," she muttered. As she stormed off, one of her friends gave us an apologetic look before following her. My mom watched them go. "You know what the sad part is?" she said quietly. "What?" "She'll tell this story like she was the victim." I nodded. People like that always do. We grabbed our luggage and headed toward the exit. Outside, the mountains were dusted with snow. The air was crisp. Everything felt lighter. "First class was worth it," my mom said, smiling. "Especially the free show," I added. We both laughed. And somewhere out there, in a middle seat of memory she'd never escape, Karen was still wondering how everything had gone so wrong.